The stakes just keep getting higher. We got LSU and Florida in Death Valley on Saturday. Matt Muscoon is on the line from ESPN Baton Rouge and New Orleans. Matt, it's been a while. It's good to see you, man.
Hey, Mark. How are you, man?
I am doing just fine. I appreciate you stopping by. I know you're running around like a crazy man trying to get everything done and prep these football games and cover them and do all the things that you're doing on a daily basis. But man, so much has happened with this football program since the last time we talked. You know, it was in that 8 or 9 win cycle over and over and disappointing season after disappointing season. Now, I haven't talked to you since probably the conclusion of 2018, which was a nice season, but now we might be looking at a special season.
It is shaping up that way, and Saturday against Florida will obviously have a lot of bearing on that. But you know, the whole vibe changed. And I was one, Mark, that was super pessimistic about the direction of the program. Admittedly, you know, heading into last year, you know, you had a team where you were coming off a super disappointing 2017 season. You had lost basically every key contributor that you had from that team, and you were starting over in 2018 and facing one of the toughest schedules in the country. And they went 9-3, had a really nice road win against Auburn last year, beat Georgia at home. They won a New Year's Six Bowl, and the arrow pointed up. And really, it all started with Joe Burrow. And honestly, Mark, getting Joe Burrow is the thing that swung, you know, sort of that fulcrum a year ago, and it's the thing that's catapulted this program this year into what could be, as you put it, a very special season.
And Matt, the thing that you highlighted a number of times last year, and I certainly was on board with it, is that Joe Burrow was doing this with little prep time on campus, with the terminology, with the playbook, with the coaching staff, and able to acclimate him. And sure, he appeared to be a game manager type guy, but that was impressive if you took into context the circumstances. And now with the introduction of the New Orleans former assistant, I'm not
Joe
thinking
Brady,
Joe Brady. And the new offense, we're now seeing Joe Burrow in his element, what he's used to running, and he's just taken off.
Yeah, it's, you know, people forget too, a year ago, it's stunning that Burrow's sitting here through 5 games with 22 touchdown passes, which in and of itself is the same thing. I mean, Mark, the LSU Fighting Tigers are leading the country in scoring offense through 5 weeks. Like LSU football leading the country in scoring offense through a month. Like Mark, I can't help but laugh. I'm getting off topic, but I can't help but laugh at the people who say, yeah, well, who have they played? This is LSU. They've had dozens and hundreds of opportunities against cream puffs to stack up enormous numbers and have never been able to do. Realize that in the history of the Southeastern Conference, no team in the history of this league has scored more points through 5 weeks than this LSU team. Not Spurrier's Florida teams, not these Bama teams with Tua. Name it. No team in the history of the SEC has scored at a clip that LSU has through the first 5 weeks. It's stunning to watch, but it's a lot of what you said. It is obviously bringing in Joe Brady, who has brought some modern concepts into the offense. It's Burrow taking another step this year, and quite honestly, developing not only in his comfort level, but Mark, as you mentioned, this is essentially what Joe Burrow was running in high school. You know, there's a lot of these 7-on-7 concepts. So this is more of his native language offensively. And then you pair him with these receivers, which LSU's already had great receivers. I mean, Mark, LSU, you realize LSU had Odell Beckham and Jarvis Landry on the same college football team and couldn't do anything remotely close to this? I mean, it's bonkers what they're doing. And Joe Burrow is the catalyst. There's no question.
Got these 3 running backs in the backfield. How do you see that playing out? How has it played out thus far? Obviously, there's been the one competitive game that was a near classic, a decided win, but at the same time, a close win. But, you know, the 2 studs coming in from as freshman status and just in regards to what do you expect to see against the tougher teams down the stretch, and obviously starting with Florida here?
So it is kind of an oddity because LSU has been known as always having great running backs. Like they have this string of all SEC running backs when you can look from Kevin Volk to guys like Dominic Davis and Justin Vincent and Joseph Adai, who was a first-round draft pick. And then You kind of went into that whole era of Jacob Hester and Keelan Williams and Charles Scott and Stephen Ridley, and then Jeremy Hill and Kenny Hilliard and Spencer Ware. I mean, they just like, and then Leonard Fournette and Darius Guy, just boom, boom. They've always had that bell cow back, and this team doesn't have it. Clyde Edwards-Helaire is their best, most consistent back. He's a junior now. He is one of the best in the country, actually, at yards after contact, but I think that's probably more of an indictment on your offensive line. The two freshmen you mentioned are John Emery and Ty Davis-Price. And Emery was a 5-star from New Orleans, and Ty Davis-Price is a high 4-star from Baton Rouge, two of the top 10 running backs in the country. The thing that those two guys are struggling with right now, Mark, is trying to pick up offensive concepts, trying to learn how to pick up blitzes as well, which, I mean, the key to LSU season is keeping number 9 upright. And if you can't help do that and you're a liability there, it's going to be tough getting on the field. And then, last week, Emery fumbled against Utah State around midfield. So I think there's no question those two guys have explosive, game-breaking ability as ball carriers, as runners, but they're trying to learn the position as a whole right now for Clyde Edwards-Helaire. But if you want something to watch for this week, watch those fumbles, man, because the last 2 games, Joe Burrow and Clyde have fumbled a mesh point each of the last 2 weeks. They recovered against Utah State, but against Vanderbilt, Vandy recovered that for a touchdown late in the first half. So that's been an issue for LSU at times this year. It's been holding on to the football. And Ed Orgeron stressed it this week that this was going to be the focus this week, was working on ball purity. So we'll see if that pans out on Saturday.
Now, has the level of play on the opposing sideline factored into the defensive metrics, meaning the games have gotten away from the other team? There have been yards and points during garbage time, because I see knocks against the LSU defense. The one game that I watched, every play was obviously Texas. Otherwise, I've not seen the team. The
Right.
score was huge on both sides against Vandy, and we usually don't see that out of the Commodores. Your thoughts about the defensive side?
Yeah. Well, good on you, because most people haven't seen this LSU team play, except for the game against Texas. So here's the reality with LSU's defense. Their first 11 are as good as LSU's ever had. Caleb Von Chasson is an edge rusher that could be your first-round draft pick. Rashard Lawrence is an interior defensive lineman who is preseason All-SEC. You've got linebackers like Jacob Phillips, who is a 5-star and a 100-tackle guy. Michael Divinity, who's a senior now and a 100-tackle guy. I think everybody knows about Grant Delpit, who was an All-American a year ago at safety, and Christian Fulton, who's a projected first-round pick at corner. They bring in Derek Stingley, who is the number 1 corner in the country. Some had him rated as the number 1 overall player in the country for this recruiting cycle. Their first 11, LSU's first 11, are as good as they've ever been. The problem that LSU's had is depth. And what happened against Texas, Mark, is they saw 4 guys in their defensive front 7 get injured in that game. And Chasson, Lawrence, Glenn Logan, another defensive lineman, and Michael Divinity. And they had 35 days from Texas to Florida. And in those 35 days, they were going to play Northwestern State, Vanderbilt, they had an open date, and then played Utah State. So I think collectively LSU's coaching staff said, you know what? Take a month off. Just get right, because the gauntlet's coming, but now the gauntlet's here. So what happened in that time is LSU was missing significant players. But what was exposed is the fact that LSU doesn't have great depth. Now, they're all those guys to play on Saturday against Florida. Maybe not Glenn Logan. He'd be the one guy that's questionable. But the rest of the guys can play. The question is, if anybody goes down, who's next? And are those guys safe now after not having played significantly for a month now? And those are very legitimate questions. You mentioned the Vanderbilt game. Vanderbilt had 2 defensive scores in that ball game, and then late when LSU put up 55, they did add some. But there have been plays to be had against this LSU defense so far this year, and that is something worth watching. Can Dan Mullen do what he's so great at and scheme mismatches to get his athletes in space? Saw last week in the first possession of that Florida Auburn game where he got Freddie Swain on a linebacker, and it was a house call. So that's something certainly worth watching this weekend.
Mark Rogers TV, the voice of college football. We bring in the best bloggers, broadcasters, and writers in the nation to set you up for Week 7, LSU, Florida. This is the marquee matchup of the week. Oklahoma, Texas, obviously. I'll give it its fair shake as well. Matt, when we talk Florida football, they've not been impressive. And up until last week, people were very much doubtful of their ability to stay with Georgia, hang in the race, be a legitimate contender for any type of championship this year. But Auburn goes there. They rattle Bo Nix. The front seven was suffocating. They make the big plays on offense. Kyle Trask looks to fill the part. Hopefully he's fully healthy this week for LSU, but the Tigers still a 13-point favorite in this game. Still not a lot of belief in Florida being that legit.
So a few things on Florida. Back in Hoover at SEC Media Days this summer, I picked Florida to win the East. And I actually picked Florida straight up to beat Auburn last week. So I am a believer in Florida's defense. I'm a believer in Florida's defense. I'm not trying to pat myself on the back, just providing context for what I'm about to say. I'm a believer in Florida's defense. I think you saw their defensive front seven is probably the best in football. If not Florida's, it's Auburn's, and both are spectacular. I think you're splitting hairs. Florida's always had great athletes in the secondary, and Florida always produces great skill guys. You see Freddie Swain and you see Tyree Cleveland. I don't know that Kadarius Toney's going to play this week, but LaMichael Pirine is probably not a great SEC back, but certainly competent enough. He ripped off an 80-yarder last week. I like Florida a lot. That said, I totally understand the point spread being what it is. And I think you got to sometimes understand context. LSU's 5-0 against spread this year. Las Vegas has been really slow to catch up to LSU. And so they've gotten hammered. I mean, every time an LSU line has been posted this week, professional money comes in, hammers that line, and you see it raise. The Texas week, Texas opened as a 1-point favorite in that ballgame. It got bet all the way to LSU -7. It was an 8-point swing in a week. The public has been quicker to believe in LSU than Las Vegas. And I think that's why you saw that number where it is this week. Vegas has been getting hammered, and they said, we got to do something to start generating money on the other side of the line so we don't keep getting killed by LSU. And so that's why you saw the large number, I think. But, Mark, I think LSU had a great chance to cover that line because I just don't know that I trust Kyle Trask to come into Tiger Stadium at night, protect the football, and consistently put together 8, 10, 12 play drives. And that's what LSU, make no mistake, that's what LSU is going to make him do. The challenge for LSU is to not turn the ball over, give Florida a short field. Like I mentioned, giving up 2 defensive scores against Vanderbilt. They turned it over in the red zone against Utah State this past week. They turned it over in the red zone against Texas, and LSU came up with a great goal line stand. If LSU forces Florida to go the length of the field, I just don't think Trask can score with Joe Burrow in this offense right now. So part of me understands why that line is what it is.
So to me, Matt, I look at the line generally in 2 different ways in games like this. One being, what would happen if they played 100 times? What is the scope of that type of percentage probabilities? But they only play once. So if this is a 3-point game or a 4-point game, a 1-score game with 5 minutes left, and then LSU tacks on and it's 42-27 final, they cover, that's not going to shock me or anyone, I would hope. But at the same time, if they played 100 times, I would just think if I took 13 every time, well, I think Florida wins the game outright, probably 35 out of 100 right out of the gate, and probably keep it close a number of other times. So over the course of time now, whether that's going to play out one time, man, it just seems 13 just seems, wow, I didn't expect it.
I think last year was 3. It was close to it. It was around the field goal with Florida as a slight favorite over LSU. And I believe that game ended up an 11-point margin. Florida was up 3 or 4 late, and then Burrow threw the pick 6, covered, and it was a double-digit win. The game didn't play out that way, but it looked like that. And those are the types of things I think you have to factor in. I don't pretend to be a gambling expert, but I feel like I've seen enough of those things play out the way they can. And truthfully, Mark, I have watched every play of this LSU offense, and I laugh at the notion that they're doing what they're doing because it's who they're playing. They are executing at an efficiency clip that LSU just never has before. And they have amazing athletes on the outside. I mean, Terrace Marshall's a 5-star. Jamar Chase is a 5-star. Justin Jefferson, is a potential top 50 pick in the NFL draft. I mean, they'll churn through 6, 7, 8 wide receivers that you can't sleep on any of them. And you can try to guard one of them, and you may have a lockdown guy that can go get that guy on the outside. Then what about this guy and this guy and this guy? And it's a relentless machine offensively, man. And if Florida can hold LSU under 20, God bless them. I probably won't pick Florida to lose again this year. But that's a mighty task this week, man.
And Matt, off the field, I've seen Burrow interviewed on the national shows. He seems like a fun interview. He's cocky but still likable.
That's a good way to put it. And honestly, quarterback. I like Baker Mayfield beating Oklahoma or beating Ohio State and then planting the Oklahoma flag at the middle of the field at Ohio State. Like, I'm okay with that with a quarterback. I want a guy that's going to come in the huddle down 3 in the fourth quarter with 2 minutes to go and say, let's go win it. And just have that kind of confidence. So but there's a lot of different ways, man. Just down the street from here is, we watch the Saints, and Drew Brees is the antithesis of that. He's the picture of class and respecting opponents and, not speaking out of turn and never giving bulletin board material. And he's a dominant player who wants to win badly and desperately. He's the heartbeat of that team. So there's a lot of different ways to do it, man. But I don't mind it with Joe. And he, Ed Ogeron said an interesting thing. He gave an interview to Ross Dellinger, I believe, in Sports Illustrated. He said, where, it might have actually been, forgive me, I think it might have actually been in Sporting News, but where it was, forgive me for not knowing offhand. But Joe Burrow, had mentioned that LSU saved him. And in turn, Ed Ogeron said, no, man, you saved us. And I think it's been that kind of symbiotic relationship where, Burrow was trying to find himself at a spot at Ohio State where, he had been beaten out from the job at his dream school. And similarly, Ed Ogeron was facing tons of criticism. And quite honestly, his job was on the line a year ago. And if they don't land Joe Burrow, I'll say this candidly, I don't think Ed Ogeron's the coach at LSU today if Joe Burrow wasn't the quarterback a year ago. Because against that schedule, you probably would have been looking at a 7-5, 6-6 type season. I don't think Ed Ogeron would have survived that. So in many respects, these two did save each other, and it's got LSU in a great spot right now.
Matt Moscone to join us from ESPN Baton Rouge and New Orleans. So Matt, you are connected to the LSU fan base like few others. So I got to think that there's a split between the believers, like this is different, this team's different, versus I got to see November. I got to see November play out.
Nope. We'll see what happens in Tuscaloosa. Nobody's delusional. Nobody's delusional in thinking that Alabama's still not really good. But I'll tell you this much, Mark. LSU was never going to beat Alabama playing the style of football they were. Let's call it what it was. They were never they could play a year ago, LSU played Alabama better defensively than any team in the country until Clemson in the championship game. People forget, because Alabama lost that championship game, people forget how dominant that offense was all year. But LSU played the best game defensively against that Alabama team that anybody had, and they got shut out in their own stadium. They were blown out because they couldn't score. This team can score on anybody. They can. I'm not saying they'll beat everybody, but they can score on anybody. That wasn't the case a year ago, and that much, there's no confusion here. But here's the thing: so can Alabama with Tua and all Judy and Waddle and all Smith and all those receivers. Like, everybody knows what Alabama is, but it's got a lot more intrigue now than it would have before this year, for sure.